Looks good to me. All right. Well, if you're ready, I'm ready. I think
All set.
we can do this thing. So the recording gets started here. Oh, kitty.
He knows when the recording starts.
Yeah, they do. They have an innate way of knowing that, don't they?
Yes, they do.
All right. So the recording is going. So we are going to get started in 3, 2, 1.
Can it be done or not?
How soon before the plant becomes operational?
3 weeks, maybe less.
Well, it's been a while since I've flown an F-18, and I'm not sure who I'd trust to fly the other 3, but I'll find a way to make it work.
I think you misunderstand, Captain.
Sir?
We don't want you to fly it. We want you to teach it.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen? It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically, we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, aka TV's Travis. This is episode number 215, and our movie this week was Top Gun Maverick. And here to talk to me about it, Adam from the So Wizard podcast. How are you?
Doing good. Glad to be back.
Excellent. Yes, good to have you back. All right, so my first question for you is, were you a fan or did you watch the original Top Gun?
I did. I mean, of course, it's one of those classics. When they were doing the sequel, I was hesitant, but that's kind of the age we're living in now.
Sure.
Everything old is new again.
Yep. Yep, which I'm sure we're going to get into quite a bit.
Yeah.
So you were a fan of the original one. You'd seen that, but you were a little tentative about this one, but you did finally get to watch it. So
Yes.
Overall, how was that experience that first time watching it?
Overall, I really liked it. It's definitely one you want to watch on the largest format you can. Like,
Yes.
This is not one to watch on your phone on the way to work.
No, not at all.
But it just had, I was saying, I had a friend over to watch it, and I was saying it to him. It's like a lot of the lines were kind of predictable, and you know how it's going to turn out and all that. But it's kind of good in a way because it's like that comfortable feeling of nostalgia, even though it was a new movie. Because we don't get like blockbuster type movies like that unless it's Marvel at this point.
This is true. Yeah. So like you, I had seen the original. There was an inescapable thing. And I saw that when I was a kid. I watched it several times since then. I've always enjoyed it. You know, I know what it is. It's a naval recruiting video for 2 hours, which I'm fine. That's fine. It's an enjoyable movie, and it looks great. Tony Scott, I feel like, is an underrated action director. He was really good at capturing imagery that stuck with you and making action movies that you cared about characters in too. And so when this was getting made, I was kind of like you. I was a little bit skeptical because sequels are always tough. Legacy sequels even more so, where there's been so long of a gap between the movies.
Yes.
And in this case, we were over 30 years since the first movie had come out. And this was supposed to come out in 2019, I think. They were filming in 2018. And then it was like late 2019, early 2020, but then they pushed it back. Then COVID hit and it got pushed back a little further. And Tom Cruise was adamant that this had to be released in theaters. And I'm with you. Watching this movie, I did go and see it in the theater. You have to watch this on the biggest screen you can find.
Yeah.
Because it is visually stunning watching this movie and knowing what they put into it, because it was really important to Tom Cruise and to Joseph Kosinski, who directed it, that they do as much as they could in camera with real flights, like they did in the first movie. Because that was the thing with Top Gun in 1986, was it was unprecedented for an aerial dogfighting movie. The level of access they got from the Department of Defense, and the types of footage that they could get. It didn't just look. It looked like nothing we'd ever seen at that time. And so to kind of try to recreate that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it has a different feel. I mean, I know obviously people say that with like CG characters versus real, you could definitely tell that. But in this, it was seamless as to what was practical and what they had to enhance or change with a computer. And all of it, you could tell me the entire thing was real. You could tell me the entire thing was animated. I would believe you both ways.
Yeah, because they really put so much effort into it, and I can't imagine filming this from a cinematography standpoint where you are like outdoor shoots are always hard anyway, right? Because you're at the mercy of your environment. And in this case, not only were they at the mercy of the environment and the lighting that they could get from the sun in these planes, but for a lot of those scenes, I found you find out that the actors were doing the camera start and stop.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Because they would have it all rigged in the cockpit, and so they had to start the camera, they had to stop the camera, they had to do things like touching up their own makeup before a shot would go, and all that kind of stuff. Because you can't get a camera operator into that. It's the pilot and then the actor, and that's it. So that was kind of really cool to hear about. But yeah, I just loved the look of all of this. And I'm with you. There are parts of it that are definitely CG and green screen. I think a majority, if I'm right, a majority of the end dogfight in the F-14 is more done green screen than the rest of the movie where they had the F-18s because they didn't have a working F-14 to use. I couldn't tell.
No, not at all.
It's seamless. It's so well done. It also helps to have a director that has a visual effects background like Kaczynski has, because he's not only does he know visual effects, he knows legacy sequels. We'll kind of get into, and so that helps a lot, I think, when you're doing a movie like this.
Even like you were talking about the difficulty of the shooting, and it's not just the physically when you're there shooting something, it's difficult, but it's also like, how do you storyboard this? Because it's so disjointed. You have to film all this jet stuff. You have to film all the ground stuff. You have to film all the face reactions. And it's not even like an Iron Man where you can have Robert Downey Jr. in like a sound booth because you don't see anything around him.
Right.
You see the planes around the actors. It all has to line up somehow. And I mean, there was probably a lot of computer trickery in there, but even with that, you have to see the final picture in your head as you know what shots you need. It's incredible.
Yep. Yeah, and they pull it off so well. And they did. I mean, there was training that they had to go through in order to get in the cockpits and fly. They didn't obviously hit the types of G levels that they were talking about in the movie. But I do think, I mean, Tom Cruise, I believe, probably got up there and had somebody pull 7.5 Gs on him while he was in the cockpit, because he's a crazy person and would do stuff like that.
He probably insisted on it.
If he could hang off the side of the plane while they were doing it and they'd let him, he would do that. But you had all these other Miles Teller and characters, actors in the jets doing all this stuff, which is just incredible to think about. It's also funny because Miles Teller is quite a bit taller than Tom Cruise, so
There's
him fitting in the cockpit.
Where they didn't even do the apple boxes.
I know, they just let him be that much taller than him. I did read. John Hamm had a quote where he's like, "I'm just really glad that my character didn't have any jet fighting scenes, so I didn't have to go through all of that, because he got to stay on the ground the whole time." But yeah, so like Joseph Kosinski, who directed this, I don't know if you're familiar with him and other work that he's done, but he was the guy that brought us Tron Legacy.
I really enjoyed that. That's an underrated movie.
I am with you. And I feel like we're a little bit in a minority, although a growing minority, of people that really enjoyed that movie, because you look at Tron and Tron Legacy, and those are also 28 years apart. So I think Tron was 82 and Tron Legacy was like 2010. But how much things changed between those movies visually, and yet it still felt like the same world.
Yeah.
Which is not
even in the
easy
world of
thing to
video
do.
games that age incredibly quickly.
Yeah, this is not easy to do. So Kosinski was the right person to bring in and have direct this movie, I feel like. And he had worked with Tom Cruise before on Oblivion. And that was the movie he did right after Tron Legacy, actually. And I kind of like him. Really, his big ones are Tron Legacy, Oblivion. He did Only the Brave, which I have not seen. This, and then he did a movie called Spiderhead. That
was okay.
I heard mixed reviews on. But, it's got Hemsworth. It's got Miles Teller. I like Miles Teller quite a bit.
Yeah, I love Miles Teller.
And I liked him in this particularly. While he's basically he's a little one note for the first half of the movie. This movie feel okay. Let me ask you this: did this feel like two different movies to you?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I think the no part of it is that, well, the yes part is that it's a throwback to how they used to make movies, and the yes part is with the new flair.
Okay.
So I think that's why I felt like two different movies, but to me, it was almost part of the experience.
Yeah, I can see that. Narratively, there felt like there was a big divide too. Like at that 1 hour mark, it's about 2 hours and 10 minutes, and somewhere around that 1 hour mark, when we sort of shift gears into now we're going to do the trench run that they're doing. Yeah. It did feel like during that time that they were pushing back and kind of delaying the movie a little bit, that maybe they refined some story elements and sort of changed some things up. Because if I have a complaint, it's that it felt like Rooster went from like too quickly kind of came around to Maverick. And we didn't have a lot of like lead up to that. It was sort of angry, and then he's fine with him. It's okay now, sort of thing. Like
and
when
there was
he
hardly
picked
even
him.
like a conversation with Maverick where Rooster would be like, "Okay, I need to marinate in this a while. Now I see his point of view."
Mm-hmm.
It's like you said. It's weird because it felt a little bit like the story was stalling, and then it felt like the mission comes on abruptly all at once.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really the only complaint I kind of have with this movie is just that, because everything that they do works, and this is a movie that's playing on nostalgia. Yes. You mentioned that already. It's definitely just a warm blanket. If you liked Top Gun, you like this movie because it's hitting all those same story beats. This is, Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
Yes, it's the perfect example.
Where it's gonna take and just remix a little bit of what they've already done, but it works. And right down to like our introduction to Rooster is him playing a piano, singing Great Balls of Fire, wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Yeah. Like everything is exactly the same. Some people can find that a little schmaltzy and a little too on the nose. I didn't mind that because they were portraying that character as just really leaning into who his dad was and being that guy. And ultimately, this story is about Pete Mitchell. It's about Maverick and what he's going through at this stage in his life. And so for him to be faced with, here is now Goose's son at the age Goose was when he died, or really close to that. And so for him to be so much like his dad, even though he barely knew his dad, that's hard for Maverick to have to deal with. And he's dealing with sort of the whole idea that he's getting too old for the Navy, and they don't want, he's not getting promoted, but he doesn't want to get promoted either. Like he just wants to stay as a pilot. And the Navy's kind of like, no, you're in your 50s now. You've been doing this for 30 years. You can't just continue to be a pilot. But it's all he knows how to do. So that didn't bother me too much. And again, Miles Teller, I think, just looks the part and plays the part really well. He
did a lot with a little.
Yeah. I just wanted a better transition between angry Rooster and the Rooster that's like, no, I just saved your life. Because it's like if more of the first part of it had been that sort of underlying respect for Maverick that you can see he has once they start the mission, that I just wish there'd been more of that kind of sort of given to us in the early parts of the movie instead of him just being angry.
I feel like there's probably a lot of that shot because especially in the first third of the movie, I would say, there's a lot thrown at you where it's like, oh, is this going to be Tom Cruise fades to the background a little bit, and it's about Rooster and I forget all their call signs, Hangman, Phoenix, because they're really and Bob, which was a funny joke that I thought was going to have a payoff at the end, but they just didn't have time for all these little things. But they planted so many seeds where there could be a 5-hour cut of this movie where everyone gets their due and everyone gets their story.
Yeah. And I think that was the original idea. If I remember correctly, when I first heard that they were finally going into production instead of just the development hell of like, oh, a Top Gun sequel is going to get made, that, like they're still doing with Highlander right now. They've been talking about the Highlander sequel for 20 years. That what I had heard was that it was going to be Maverick as sort of a secondary character. Like, he was going to be in the movie and he was going to be a part of it, but it was more of a passing the torch and let's get the younger crew in. And I think somewhere along the line, it was decided, no, we really need to make this about Maverick, and that's what's going to get people into the theater. And the business side of filmmaking is a major part of it. There's no escaping that. It is an art form, but it's also a business. And
well, especially now with movies like this becoming more expensive than they're worth a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely. And so normally I would heavily rail against like, well, we need to do the best to, the business side of things, because as somebody who has made films and enjoys the art of filmmaking, I want the art part of it to be the forefront. But somebody somewhere was like, you know what, we need to focus on Maverick, because that's going to, especially with the pandemic, and we're going to push things back, and we need to start trying to get people back into theaters. A movie like this, with how much it is going to cost to make, whether he's a main character or not, and because Tom Cruise is helping to produce it, like, he probably thought the same thing. We need to get people in the theater, and what's going to get them in the theater is something that they recognize. And so that kind of made sense, and that's probably where that little bit of disjointedness comes in the two halves of the movie. I will say, when I saw this the first time, and I'm curious if you had a similar experience. So the opening, first they have the opening to the movie itself on the aircraft carrier, which is just pure, we're just going to recreate the opening of Top Gun. And I'm fine with that. Like, not a problem, because that stuff's just cool to watch. But when they get to Maverick and he's in his hangar and he's working on his P-51 Mustang, and it's time to go, and he hops on his old motorcycle and rides out, and they're going to do the test flight. As that was going on, and then they had the moment where he pushed beyond Mach 10, and oh crap, he's doing something dumb. He's doing what he's not supposed to do, and the plane blows up. My first thought was, did we just watch the death of Maverick, and now we're going to be like, here's what happened leading up to that moment? Because that was kind of the feeling that I got, was like, okay, now we're going to talk about what happened leading him up to this moment where he was once again going to push the envelope too far. And then they didn't go that route, which I'm kind of glad that they didn't. But like that, that was my feeling the first time watching. I was like, oh, are we doing this in the movie? And then, of course, as it kept going, I realized they weren't doing that. Was that at all similar for you, or not?
I see what you're saying. Just knowing that it's a legacy sequel to a beloved movie from the 80s, I didn't see a world where Maverick didn't walk away with a happy ending.
Fair enough.
They could have done a thing where it leads up to that, and then, you think he's dead, and the whole movie you think he's dead leads up to that, and then it turns out, like they catch up to where it is, and then it continues on.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. I felt like there could have been a little bit more fallout, because that jet probably cost, $2 billion or more.
Yeah.
I can't even wrap my head around the kind of money, but that was also kind of a cool way. Like, you start the movie off exciting, and it's also like, this is why he's a 30-year captain.
Yeah, exactly. This is why he's still just a pilot, because he does that.
Yeah.
It's a really fun opening scene that, you get Ed Harris, which is always a win in my book if Ed Harris shows up. And he's
great.
There are so few, like, I shouldn't say so few, but there are actors that just can play an antagonist better than anyone else. And Ed Harris is one of them. He's not always a bad guy, but he's so good at playing somebody who you can butt heads with, because he's just got, like, there's something to his speech patterns that just make him sound like he is the most stubborn human being to ever walk the earth. And he's so good at that.
Yeah.
And, to take over, he's sort of the opening to this movie. He's the version of, what's his name, that went on to, or was in Back to the Future as well. I can't think of his name now. But you know who the bald actor that was the principal in Back to the Future, and he was the
Oh yeah, I don't
He
know
was
the
in the-
actor's name. Yeah, Strickland was the character. But...
Strickland. Yeah, that actor. Who I'll find his name here, but he was sort of this movie's version of that guy, and Ed Harris is the perfect kind of legacy version of that character. I feel like.
Yeah.
So
It was a little strange because I feel like Ed Harris and John Hamm. I mean, maybe because I just don't know the military protocols, but I feel like they could have been like you didn't need two roles for that.
no, you're right. And Ace, thank you. James Tolkan is the character or the actor. You're right. That was kind of the same character in a way, or at least it was a character filling the same role.
Yeah.
I think the main difference was John Hamm is sort of taking the place of who Tom Skerritt was in the first Top Gun without the kind of mentor angle, because you don't really need that for Maverick at this point.
Yeah.
He is that mentor. He is Viper for all intents and purposes. But they had the John Hamm character being, a former Top Gun grad himself. And they had to really walk that line of like making him effective as a commanding officer, as a flight boss, without making it too much of like, well, all he's going to do is rail against Maverick for the entirety of the movie.
I did like his writing because in everything he said, I mean, it's a little bit cold where it's like, well, we're just going to double the time that this mission's going to take and people probably aren't coming back from it, but that's the mission. That was a bit heavy-handed where he's just like, I don't care if my pilots die. But at the same time, I did like how he was written because he's like, this is the job. I'm by the book. He's what Maverick could have been if Maverick followed the rules.
Yeah. Yeah. He is what you imagine Iceman would have been as the flight boss.
Yeah, there you go. That's even better. Yeah.
Which I want to get to Iceman because that was a cool thing in this movie. But
they did a great job with that.
Yeah. But yeah, having John Hamm's great. Like John Hamm's one of those
Love
guys.
him and everything.
Yeah. Doesn't matter what he's doing. Good guy, bad guy, antagonist, hero. He's just great. Plus he's ridiculously funny. It's kind of unfair, actually. Now that I think about
he's got it all.
like John, come on, let's save a little bit of whatever you've got for the rest of us. But he was good. My other complaint was, and I don't know if it was a scheduling thing, if they just didn't want, if he didn't want to come back and do the movie, if they weren't able to secure him or what, is the character in this of Warlock, the other kind of flight boss that's the subordinate of John Hamm, who was great. And I thought that character was pretty fun. I wish that had been Sundown from the first Top Gun.
Okay.
Because I like Clarence Gilliard Jr. a lot, that actor. I loved him in he did Theo in Die Hard, and then he was Sundown in Top Gun, and he went on to like Walker Texas Ranger and all this kind of stuff. And I just thought, oh, you're bringing everybody else back. You couldn't get him. I don't know the behind the scenes if they even tried or what, but I was just kind of hoping that they had done that. They didn't.
There might have also been something too, though, where if all the old faces show up and they're in similar positions to where they were, it would lessen the story of like Maverick. You should have aged out of this years ago. True.
That's not a bad point. I just liked him, and I was kind of hoping we'd see him in there. But no,
yeah,
that's a good
from
point.
the movie side of it, I see what you're saying, especially for a legacy sequel, because that's what we're showing up for.
Yeah, and he could be the kind of guy, because the character of Warlock sort of is a bit of a Maverick fan. He's sort of on Maverick's side, and I feel like that could have been Sundown because they did fly together a couple of missions.
That's true. It
in
would
that
have
first
fit.
movie. So, but hey, it's fine. We had his warrant officer Hondo that follows him from the opening thing to Top Gun. I loved how he was the one issuing the push-ups.
Yeah, that was funny.
That was a lot of fun. I kind of wish we had more backstory for them, because there seems to be something there. Is like they've obviously worked together for a long time, and we don't really know. It's sort of, let's introduce a new character, and he's got a backstory with our main character, but at the same time, that's a little bit of world building. It's sort of extra stuff that what it does is it makes me want to know more. It makes me want to dive in more to like the world that they have here.
Yeah, because they kind of did that with Jennifer Connelly also.
Right. Yeah, a character who's mentioned in the first movie by name, but that's it. And then to have her in this as sort of the love interest, which is another one of those where I think that's that same kind of, they were rewriting some of the end of the movie or the second half of the movie, because she's sort of forgotten until the very end again, because she doesn't have a big part of the mission, obviously. So
Right, yeah, she has nothing to do with that.
with her having nothing to do with that, she just sort of like, oh yeah, remember her? She was part of this movie too. And then
Yeah.
comes back at the end. And again, Jennifer Connelly, anything she's in, doesn't matter if it's Labyrinth when she's 16 or this now. I love seeing Jennifer Connelly and stuff. She's a fantastic
always good
actor.
and everything. The casting in this was very, very good, because all like the young people, the faces you recognize, the ones you don't, they all did a great job.
And we mentioned Miles Teller, and I liked him a ton as Rooster. It's kind of scary how much he looked like a young Anthony Edwards too. It's he
could see that.
definitely like he definitely could pass as his son. But Val Kilmer gets to come back. He has a cameo as Iceman, and that was a really, really great scene, and I think was kind of that emotional crux that sort of pushed this movie over from being like a good legacy sequel to something where you start to really, because you really care about these two guys at that moment that they're sitting down together. And with Val Kilmer having gone through all of the health stuff that he has, for him to be able to show up at all was pretty cool. And I just like the way they worked all that. They worked it into the story that, Iceman had throat cancer as well. And it's back and all of this. But I dug that scene so much, just the two of them.
The way they handled it was perfect, because when Maverick was just texting with him, my friend's like, oh, I hope he shows up. I loved his character. And I was like, I don't think he can. I don't think he can really act. He can't really speak. And then the very next scene was, oh, his cancer's back. He's having a hard time speaking. It's like it's obvious. It's kind of the most obvious answer to the problem, but at the same time, genius the way they did it.
And so well done. And because Val Kilmer is the actor that he is, he can still convey so much without having to speak. And so that's where that whole scene is so great, because here you got Val Kilmer who's not speaking, and there's so much being said by the character of Maverick in response to, here's my friend, somebody that started off as a rival, became a friend, and you can imagine what they went through. And he's seeing him in this state now where he can't talk, and Maverick sort of realizes he doesn't need to. He doesn't need to say a bunch of stuff. He can say it in a few words. And I mean, I found myself getting emotional during that scene. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it was.
Yeah, it was one of those scenes. It's like I didn't know how much I wanted this to be in the movie till I saw it.
Yeah, exactly. And then they did, I guess, synthesize his voice a little bit for those couple of lines he had that he kind of croaks out. But that was
As
really
an enhance,
powerful.
or
I don't know if it was an enhance or if they like pieced it together so they could kind of AI reconstruct his voice.
okay, because I don't know how bad his voice is at this point.
I'm not sure either. If you had told me no, his voice was just that scratchy, but he was able to eke out those couple of lines, I'd believe you.
Yeah.
And those were, again, really powerful, and a great moment of levity too, of the which one of us is the better pilot. This is a great moment. Let's not ruin it.
Yeah, that was really well done.
And then you go back to the young group, and you've got Hangman, who is this generation's Iceman, but like dialed up to 11, and because he's all the things that Iceman was in that first movie, supremely confident to the point of being overly cocky, and you just like Glenn Powell
back it up.
Yeah, could back it up, but Glenn Powell is great because he understood the assignment of what he was supposed to do in this movie, and that was look as punchable as humanly possible.
He's got a great face for it.
He really, like, you just want to punch him in the nose constantly, and it's so perfect because he can back up everything that he's saying too, and that's what makes you want to hit him so bad. It's like, oh, you can do it too, and that's the worst. I hate you for that. So he was great. I also loved little touches like the way their helmets were. If you if you go back and watch it again and like pay attention to little production design things, their helmets are all like custom done and they have different fonts, and I just loved that. Like those were little touches. Fanboy having like a Star Trek font for his call sign, and then what a perfect call sign. He's just like giggling and grinning the whole movie. He's just geeking out over everybody. Hangman missing the A's in
I thought that was really cool with the
stuff. I thought was cool. Bob, which you're right, it was a joke that they never really played off, but I didn't realize this till I got done watching the movie. That's Bill Pullman's son.
I did see his last name was Pullman. I was wondering, but I forgot to follow up.
After I learned that, and then I saw his face, I'm like, okay, yeah, no, I see it now. But that's Bill Pullman's son, Louis Pullman. And I liked him. He was fun because you got to have. They didn't really have that character in the first movie, but you kind of got to have that one guy that's like a little. He doesn't quite get the joke. You know, he doesn't quite understand what's going on, or that's how he ends up with a call sign like Bob. That was the best he could come up with, was Bob, short for Robert. And
right. He's almost to some degree like the audience point of view, where he's the outsider on this whole group of, because they obviously had some kind of camaraderie, whether it was friendly or not.
Yeah. And that was the thing I liked too, is it never, that one time it devolved into they wanted to fight each other, which would happen. I mean, these pilots are wired different and they're so...
you're all amped up.
Yeah. But for the most part, they all got along really well. Most of the rivalry would be friendly rivalry. And I liked that too, because they didn't need to create extra forced tension with too much of that. They had just the right amount of it, I think, because again, Hangman is the kind of guy that would push someone to the point of them wanting to punch him.
And even him pushing Rooster was actually what Rooster ultimately needed. Rooster did need to commit. He did need to move faster. He did need to not hesitate.
Much the same way that Iceman, being who he was in the first movie, and Maverick being who he was, they needed each other to kind of offset. And it's just that there was no friendly way to do that. It had to be in an antagonistic manner, because Maverick at that age wasn't going to listen to anybody that couldn't outdo him, and Iceman could.
Right.
And so it's sort of the same thing. Like, Hangman knows that Rooster has this ability in him, but he also knows that the only way he's going to get it out of him is to kind of push him to the breaking point. And Rooster, being who he is, being safe because of what happened to his dad, which was another kind of subplot that I thought was really interesting, and sort of gives you a way to honor a character from the first movie without having to, like you said, bring in too many legacy characters, too many nostalgic characters. They don't have Rooster's mom, Meg Ryan's character, return for the movie. Instead, she dies off screen between the movies, but her hope or wish was that Rooster not go into the Navy because of losing Goose. Right. And that being part of the tension between Maverick and Rooster is him not telling her, because Maverick thinks that's the way that he needs to do it. And he sort of figures out at some point that, like, maybe that's not the way to treat him anymore. But I do love, and it does give you the sense of where Maverick has grown as a person, where he says, look, he can resent me for the rest of his life for what happened and for me pulling his papers from the Naval Academy, but he shouldn't have to resent his mom too. He's
right.
taking...
He already lost his dad. Now he's going to emotionally lose his mom. Like, no, I can be the bad guy here.
Yep. And that is something that young Maverick would not have done. Young Maverick wouldn't, especially pre-Top Gun, he just wouldn't have had the stuff in him to take that, to jump on that grenade for somebody. But that cements so much more of like his friendship with Goose and that family. So I really, really enjoyed that. It's just a fun...
Well, it did seem like... Sorry.
No. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it did seem... it was like... For Maverick losing Goose, it was just as impactful for the trajectory of the rest of his life as it was for Rooster.
Yeah, absolutely. In some ways more so, because, obviously Rooster was too young to know who his father was, whereas Maverick and Goose had spent so much
Yeah,
time
that's
together.
true. In a lot of ways, it was more impactful. You could just never say that to him, but
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and there's no, like, there's probably a part of that character of Rooster that would know that, but never want to admit it because it's his dad.
that might have been part of the resentment too. It was like, you got to know him, I didn't.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. So it was, I liked that as a subplot, but not focusing all of the movie on that, because I think that would have worn thin fairly quickly without other characters to kind of bring that about. So, but it makes for a good subplot, and it gives Maverick yet another layer of things that he's dealing with as the movie goes along. So that then when they have their big moment where Maverick can once again save Rooster and keep his promise, and jump in front of that missile for him and go down, and then only to have Rooster basically do the same thing and crash. Which
Yeah.
I've seen this movie twice now, and I laugh so much when he runs up just as Rooster is getting up from his parachute and just pushes him back to the ground. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? It's so good.
It was a really good moment, yeah. And it was good timing, too, because you're right, teetering on the edge of, like, okay, the drama's really ramped up. Our main characters are in danger. It's almost feeling like it's a little bit too much. So they have this moment of levity where it kind of, like, is a reset for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this movie teetered on the edge of, like, it plays on a lot of nostalgia, and it teetered on the edge of being too on the nose and too much, because there's twice where Maverick is basically done. He's about to get shot down or shot by the helicopter, and then he's saved at the last second by a missile from one of his comrades. And that could be too much, but the movie somehow earns it both times.
Yeah, because then they do it again when they're in the what was the F-18, the old plane that they steal.
Yeah, the old
Which
F-14.
even just stealing the plane, I'm like, it's just ridiculous.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, in our world, if they got shot down like that, they're gonna find somewhere to hide and, like, hunker down and wait for a rescue, because it's just the two of them.
Yeah,
with
they're going to get an
nothing.
exfil, and then they're going to have to make their way to it. But
Yeah.
it would have been a totally different movie if it turns into Lone Survivor.
Yeah, exactly. But in this, in this reality where Maverick lives, no, they can find an F-14 that just happens to be, the only plane left standing on this entire runway, and it's still functional. Now that was a story choice that I thought was interesting. Is they never name the country that this is happening in.
That's a good move.
And it's a good move, but they also, on top of not ever naming who it is, where this refinery, this uranium refinery was going to be happening and all of that, they also mixed and matched stuff. So, like, the jets that they were flying, those 5th generation fighter jets, were they had red star circle type logos like the old MiGs had in the first Top Gun, which are kind of North Korean-ish in nature.
Yeah.
But then the F-14 was only ever flown outside of the U.S. by Iran. And then the jets themselves are, I think, Russian. So, like, they mixed and matched all of the different possible things. So you couldn't even say, like, well, it's obviously this. They wanted to kind of make it as ambiguous as they possibly could, which is smart, and I think also just makes for a better movie.
Yeah, I kind of had the impression it was like generic terrorist organization just buying these things on the black market, whatever they can get, wherever they can get it.
Yeah. Then when they're in the F-14 and they're about to get shot down at the end by the obviously superior plane, which had a couple of great laughable moments, like when he fires the missile and that thing does the full 180 U-turn on them and goes flat and comes back, and they're just like, Maverick's never seen anything like that before. That cracked me up. But then Hangman comes out of nowhere to save him at the last minute. I think my exact notes were Hangman ex machina. Like, but I'm fine. Like,
well, it did show him in his plane, like he was ready to go. And because I was saying to my friend, we were watching the movie, is like, okay, they know they're in an old plane. They have the GPS identifier, whatever it was. They knew it was Rooster's thing. So it's like, okay,
Yep.
it is Rooster. He's airborne. Why did they not give the B team like, okay, scramble the jets, get out there and bring them home?
Yeah. Nope, we never.
I mean, I guess just to give you the surprise, but
Yeah, they wanted to keep us in suspense, but and I think in a lesser movie or a movie where I don't care about these characters as much, I think that's even more important. That moment would feel wrong. It would feel like, oh, come on, really? We're doing that now? But for some reason in this movie, I'm able to kind of give it a pass. I think because this character of Maverick and Rooster, you know, they finally they met at loggerheads, and then they were able to sort of get over that a little bit, at least to a point. And you care about them, and you want to see them come out of the movie and have a happy ending. And so, you know, could you call that lazy writing? Maybe, but I didn't mind it. Like, it didn't bother me. So
I also think, like, not only do you care about the characters, but it's also a sequel to a movie done in the era where the good guys go home, the good guys, you know, get the girl, get the prize, whatever. The bad guys lose. Like, that's just, it's non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Like,
yep, that's also
it's
very
a sequel
true.
to an 80s movie, so it's a spiritually an 80s movie.
It is. And it was a big point of the first half of the movie that Maverick kept mentioning them coming home after the mission. His entire training regimen was about them not only being able to deliver the payload and take out the refinery, but come home afterwards. And so
that was one of the big differences between him and John Hamm. Is like, John Hamm was okay. He's like, we're probably going to lose one of these 4 planes, if not 2.
yeah.
And Maverick's like, how about none?
Can we go with none, please?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was great. There were some great kind of like moments in this that then I read about later after the fact, and I'm like, wow, that actually happened that way. So when he takes off in the experimental jet in the beginning, that jet itself didn't actually fly. So I think they had an F-18 that did the flyover of that shot, that really cool shot where it comes straight over camera while Ed Harris is standing there.
Yeah, and everything shakes. Yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
and they composited in the jet over the F-18. But what's cool about that is, number one, Ed Harris was doing that shot and did stand completely straight when that happened. Like, he didn't shake or move at all, which shout out to Ed Harris for that. And the roof of that building wasn't supposed to do what it did. Like, that was a happy accident that just looked really cool to have.
Yeah.
That whole supersonic, and the roof of that thing comes off and drops back down on it while Ed Harris is just standing there like Jim Cantori in a hurricane. And I thought that was great.
That makes it even cooler, because I remember my thought watching that shot was like, well, that's a bit much. Like, the car is shaking, the roof comes off the building, and this old guy doesn't even move. But it's like, no, that's how it actually happened, so deal with it.
Yeah. So I loved that. And there was just all of the shots from inside the cockpits of those planes give you this better sense. You could do so much of this up, even, bring the camera in just a little bit closer, green screen behind them, and you can shoot a lot of it that way, which most films would do that. Most films that aren't Tom Cruise and trying to emulate what Tony Scott did 35 years ago. But to take the camera, move it just back a little bit, so you get a little bit wider of a shot. They shot everything on IMAX film, which I did see this in an IMAX theater, and that was phenomenal. But so much of that background is real, and there's something about that, the way that it moves and the way that the shot interacts with itself, that is really cool. Like, even a real simple one is the interior shot of Maverick taking off, when he takes off from the aircraft carrier. Because what do you think of when you think of a plane taking off like that? It's the pilot kind of gets thrown to the back of the seat and the plane takes off. But they added in, they have added in the fact that it's a real plane taking off. So when he does that, he gets thrown to the back of the seat, and then when they come off the end of the aircraft carrier, there's that little drop before it takes off again, which is just a little piece of authenticity that adds a little something extra to that scene, that if I hadn't told you about that, you might not even really realize it consciously.
Yeah.
But, like, now you can sort of, if you watch it again and you know, like the second time through when I'm watching it this time, I was like, oh yeah, no, I didn't even register consciously with me the first time, but it made it feel more real to me watching it because of little things like that, or just the way they moved inside the cockpit as it would bank left and right.
It felt that much more real.
Yeah. Like you can recreate some of that in a gimbal and some of that on a soundstage, but when you're not moving at those speeds, it's not the same thing. You can only, Star Trek your way jumping around so much before it looks like somebody on a soundstage moving themselves, as opposed to
especially
the way
if the actors never felt it or anything like it.
Yeah. Another one was there's a shot when they are in the F-14 and they invert that Rooster hits his head on the canopy.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't planned. He just wasn't strapped in well enough. And they decided to leave it in because it kind of felt right. Like,
yeah, a little flaw like that you should leave in, because if it's too polished, maybe you don't notice that it's too polished, but having a little bit of the polish taken off makes it feel that much more authentic, whether planned or not.
Yeah. So it adds an authenticity, and then on top of that, it's kind of a nice little. It also is that happy accident of like, oh yeah, and Goose, his problem was the canopy, and here's Rooster bumping into the canopy. So I thought, like,
that's even more perfect. Yeah,
like it layers, it adds itself onto stuff like that, and that's what makes, I think, legacy sequels fun. Is you can play with that nostalgia and you can have stuff happen that, you can do that sort of wink and nod, like, hey, you remember this, but it's got to be done well. I think Kaczynski does a good job with that in this movie and in Tron Legacy. It's what made. And it's kind of sad because, like, again, this is, a filmmaker that I love in Steven Spielberg, but it's what made me dislike Kingdom of the Crystal Skull the way that I do. I don't hate the movie. I think there's definitely watchable parts of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but there was so much of it that at times just felt like, really? No, you could have done that better. There's a better way to have that kind of a moment in the movie, and they felt lazy there. Whereas this movie didn't ever feel to me like they got lazy with their references, or like, I didn't mind, Great Balls of Fire on the piano. I thought that was fine, but I also kind of love that song. So,
but they also built it in where Tom Cruise does have the flashbacks. It was very intentional. They weren't like trying to give you a nod. It was a direct, like,
yeah,
this is what we're doing.
Yep. We've had a rash of, I would say, since about Tron Legacy, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, a bunch of kind of these legacy sequels, as sort of, you touched on it, where we're kind of in a period of really heavy nostalgia.
Yeah.
And we're seeing more and more of these. The first one I can remember off the top of my head was Escape from L.A. Was about 16 years after Escape from New York.
I didn't realize it was that far after.
Yeah, because Escape from New York, I think, is 81, and L.A. was like 96, I want to say.
That makes sense.
That was kind of the first time I could remember being like, wow, they're doing a sequel to that movie. That's an older movie. It's kind of, because usually you want to make your sequels while the property is still popular. But what we're seeing is, with all this kind of recycling of old properties, that we're getting these legacy sequels. So they bring back Indiana Jones. That does a ton of money, and it's, down the line, more and more people have disliked it. Again, I don't think it's the word. Like, it's certainly watchable, but I'm not going to choose to watch it if I've got the other three movies to watch.
Right. If you're going to watch an Indiana Jones movie, it's not that one.
Exactly. I have three choices that are all better. Although I am cautiously optimistic for the new one.
I'm scared, but it's like, I don't think it's going to be worse than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull because of the insane backlash. I think they're like, we have to do better and give Harrison Ford a better send-off.
Yes. I trust in James Mangold, the director. I mean, the man brought us Logan, and
which was excellent, yeah.
And some of my, like, I love his movie Identity. I love Copland. So he's a director that I trust in a movie. So we'll see what happens with that. But you had Tron Legacy, You had this movie, Blade Runner 2049 was another one that had 30-something years, I think, between them or something like that. Ironically, another Harrison Ford movie. If you had to kind of pick a favorite out of those legacy sequels that you've seen, where do you have one that you like more than the rest of them?
I mean, not just because I'm a massive, massive Star Wars fan, but I really think they nailed it with The Force Awakens.
That was...
Say what you want about the rest of the sequel trilogy. I mean, that's an endless conversation we could have. But that one, it was like, this is Star Wars for a new generation. It's giving you all the things you loved about it. A couple things I think I think it's unforgivable that they didn't get Luke and Leia and Han at least in a shot together.
Yeah.
You got to give us those people, you know, with R2 and C-3PO, you have to give it, but it's too late now. It is what it is. But all things considered, I think that's the best you can do on relaunching a franchise that never really went away and do it right.
That's a good one because they sort of, with the overall public feel after the prequel trilogy, it sort of felt like they had to say, okay, look, we can remember how to make Star Wars. Here's Star Wars for you, and let's restart things. That's a great choice because it honestly gave that same kind of a feel of watching A New Hope for the first time, and for this generation, it is that. And that's a thing I think a lot of people can forget sometimes, especially if you're like me and you grew up with a certain franchise. Because I'll talk to people that are 10, 15 years younger than me, and for them, the prequel trilogy is their favorite Star Wars. That's what they grew up on. Those were the first Star Wars movies they saw. They created those connections at a young age, and that kind of stuff doesn't really go away. And so
they were also the right age for like Jar Jar, which gets lambasted, but now he's kind of coming around where people are appreciating what he did for kids.
Yeah, and so I think that makes a huge difference, and I think that's where legacy sequels can be tricky because you have to play to both sides of it. You've got to make something that is going to pull at the nostalgia, tug at the heartstrings of the people that saw it originally, but it still has to be something new. It still has to be something that can be watched today that people are going to enjoy. Escape from LA, Escape from New York is an interesting case because it was the same director, and it was kind of, that almost felt like John Carpenter being like, I can pretty much do whatever. You want me to make a sequel to something? Sure, I can throw this out.
Tonally, it's so different.
It is very different. So I kind of don't put that in the same category as a lot of these because it was it almost felt like Carpenter making fun of his own movies in a way.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And it's funny. It does hold up as a comedy.
But... Oh, sure. You could even look at Scream 4 as a legacy sequel, bringing back the Scream franchise after however long it had been, and sort of revitalizing that. Horror franchises get this every so often anyway. So, again, those are kind of almost a different animal.
Too many times.
Some of them far too many times. Because you had,
I think one that did it...
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. One movie that did it really, really well without being as on the nose as like Force Awakens was Creed compared to Rocky.
Yes. I wanted to bring that one up. That's a great choice because it's not, what they did there that I liked is they didn't just remake the first story.
Yeah.
So they really gave you something
kind of the opposite.
Yeah. They gave you something real fresh and real new while still honoring what had come before it and being part of that world. And that's a testament to a filmmaker that just knows what they're trying to do and can really pull that off. And it's not easy to do. Creed is a great example. And then, I do think that Tron Legacy, for all of its faults, I think it was ahead of its time. It was very ambitious. And it really tried to do a lot. If you had the de-aging technology of movies from, say, 6-7 years after Tron Legacy and further, and you put that in there, that's a whole different movie. Because one of the complaints is, young Jeff Bridges looks plastic and looks weird. A little bit, but if you put yourself in the mindset of 2010 when that movie came out, it's phenomenal that they even
The
had
other
it look
pass
that
you can
good.
give that is he is inside a video game.
Right. That was the other part of
Is
that.
computer generated imagery.
Which is why when I saw it for the first time, I was like, this is perfect. He should look a little off. He shouldn't look like
Yeah.
like a perfectly young Jeff Bridges.
He's the Uncanny Valley version.
Yeah. Now you could say like the scene early on in the movie where he is actually the younger version of himself. Okay, there.
Yes.
But it's sort of my take on like in Rogue One, they bring in Grand Moff Tarkin, and
Yep.
it's a cool effect. They overused it. They really kind of needed Tarkin to sort of just be in the shadows a little bit more, in my opinion. And I think it would have been more effective to have just a little less of him on screen.
Well, just to prove it, in the very same movie, you have young Carrie Fisher with a word, and it sells much better than young Tarkin.
Yeah. Plus, I also think from a narrative standpoint, having that much Tarkin in it took all the teeth out of Ben Mendelsohn's character, but that's a whole other argument I could make. Like, it takes your villain that's in your movie now and neuters him right away. And he's
Kinda
no
pushes
longer
him aside at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which and that's a tough, like Rogue One is a tough one because that's another one of those, that's a legacy sequel in that they're trying to give us something new and bridge a gap. And if you're not paying attention, you might be like, oh yeah, Rogue One, sure. But then the more you think about it as you're watching the movie, you're like, yeah, none of these characters can survive because none of them are in later stories. They were all here only. So, but honestly, I think Top Gun Maverick, I don't know if it's at the top for me in terms of favorite, but it's right up there because, again, they toe that line of going too far, but they pull back just enough from it. They give you, it's a Top Gun movie. You've got to have the shirtless guys running around, oiled up scene. But they did it a little bit differently in that now instead of it just being them playing volleyball, Maverick's using it as a team building exercise, and they're playing. How did he describe it? It was like it was football, but they were playing offense and defense at the same time.
Yeah, did he call it Top Gun football, offense, defense at the same time? It was something like that.
Yeah, it was something like that, and I thought that was cool. That was a great way to mix it up just a little bit, make it something just a little bit different.
Yeah.
While still nodding to the fact that, like, yeah, because you nailed it. This is an 80s movie in spirit. It absolutely is. So the only thing we were missing was the overly done love scene with him and Jennifer Connelly. Like, it was there, but it was more sentimental in this as opposed to the way it was.
Which was a good change.
It was a very good change. Yeah, I think so. I think so because I just feel like that was a thing in 80s films that never made sense to me. I remember reviewing, and every time I watch Highlander, I have the same thought. Like, why did we have to have this scene? Like, I'm not a prude about anything. I don't have a problem with romantic scenes in movies, but when you have a movie where it's like, here's a story, screeching halt, let's have this 5-minute sex scene, and then we'll go back to it, and it feels like they tacked that on just to, like, tick a box. I don't need that.
Yeah, it's like sex sells, so we have to put these things in. It's like, yeah, but not so much anymore. Like, we get it. You can just like kind of show it starting and then fade to black, and we know what's happening. Like, it's fine.
And I think too, it also in again narratively in this movie makes a lot more sense that now he's older. A scene like that isn't going to make as much sense for him, but also it's more of an emotional connection with him and Jennifer Connelly's character and rekindling what they had kind of this on again, off again thing, and him sort of deciding, like, because the way he says it at the end, like, I'm not gonna let you get away from me again type of thing. Like, he's finally sort of realizing that, all right, I've done this pilot thing for 30 something years. It's probably time for me to settle down and not be
plant some roots. Yeah. And that was something else. It's another one of those threads where in the 5-hour cut, there would be more to it because he says, I'm never going to leave you again. And then like 2 scenes later, he's like, by the way, going on this near impossible mission I wasn't supposed to be going on.
Right.
And then when he gets back, she's like out on a trip with her daughter. So I'm like, oh, is she like, well, screw you. Like, I gave you another shot. You went and did this rebel crap again. But then they just kind of like, they didn't really have time to resolve it all. So
yeah. Yeah, no, I very much agree with you there. And I think, too, a movie like this, again, it comes back to a director that knows what they want to make and how to do this type of movie, because a legacy sequel like this is just tricky to do well,
Yeah.
I should say. And then, to your point, casting on point. Everybody.
Yep.
Like, there isn't a bad,
Big time.
there isn't a miscast person in this movie. You want to do a updated version of Iceman, you name him Hangman, you get Glenn Powell, and just have him be smarmy and smirk the whole, like his smile, the smile that he had, you just like, I just want to knock his teeth out. Is perfect.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you think of when you watch the first Top Gun and you see Val Kilmer with that same smile as he's like twirling the pen. And you're just like, I just want to knock his teeth right out of his head. It's perfect.
Yep.
All of them. I mean, and I kind of want more sort of expand on the Top Gun stuff with new characters now. Get these characters back. Have Fanboy and Payback and Bob all, doing whatever they do, and maybe they got to get together for yet another crazy mission. But now they don't have.
Well, now
Maverick
what they
anymore.
should do in a few years is Top Gun 3, where Maverick is 15, 20 minutes of screen time.
Mm-hmm. Or, what would be kind of cool? There's no way you could make it for the budget that it would take, but a series that could follow some of these different characters, and you could sort of see them.
That would be cool,
interacting.
But it would be a lot of classroom time.
It would be. It'd have to be a lot of classroom time because there's no way they could afford to shoot that many dogfights. Like, you'd have to have one episode of that series.
And after
be
what they've given
dogfights.
us, you can't do a half-assed job on it.
Exactly. But it's just these characters, like, finding out and learning more about Phoenix and how, like, because they know each other too. That's the cool thing, is all these young characters knew each other from everything that they've been doing, and then they're all coming back together. So it's like, and you've got Hangman's
you
the
can do
only,
like Top Gun 1.5 without Maverick.
yeah, Hangman's the only one that shot down an enemy, but then Phoenix is obviously a hell of a pilot because she's the one that gets picked for the mission. Her and Bob. All that kind of stuff. Get some background on John Hamm's character and sort of what he went through would be interesting too. So I very much enjoyed. Yeah, I very much enjoyed this movie, and it sounds like you had a real good time with it too. So I'm glad.
I definitely did. I mean, if you took everything out of the planes and made it 100 times worse, it's still worth watching. But the fact that they made all the connecting tissue really enjoyable also. Good, you could say, is objective because a lot of it is on the nose. They did introduce a lot of plots that they didn't tie up.
Mm-hmm.
But the ultimate end result, I didn't really care that they didn't pay off the Bob call sign joke, that the Miles Teller coming around was a little too quick. I didn't really care. I didn't need another half hour of it.
No, and honestly, another half hour in this movie, and it's way too, like, they paced it really well. Because it feels like it plays longer than the 2 hours and 10 minutes that it is. 2 hours plus with another 8 to 10 minutes of credits. Because it plays long for that, but it works. And that's always been my thing, is I don't care how long a movie is or how short it is. I don't care if a movie's 85 minutes long or 3 hours long. If it's paced well, that's what matters to me. And this was a movie that I think paced itself fairly well. And definitely I don't want necessarily, it's a testament to the movie. I want the 5 hour cut, but I don't want the 5 hour cut at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. If it came out, I would watch it for the background, but it would be like reading a supplemental book to know what's going on in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be how I would sell it to a new viewer.
Right. Exactly that. That's perfect. Excellent. Well, this has been fun. It's been great to have you back on, Adam. And we'll definitely.
Thanks a lot. I always love this.
We're not going to go another 2 years. We'll do it more often than that.
Sounds good.
So you're on So Wizard. And
Yep, I do the So Wizard podcast YouTube channel.
Okay, excellent.
So you can see me on YouTube.
Perfect. I'm going to have all your co-hosts from So Wizard on this week too, or this month. Joey's coming in, Marcellus and Aubrey are all going to be on in the next few weeks. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, very cool. So Wizard month.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun for me because you guys are great. I love the show. I love So Wizard, and a lot of the content that you guys put out, and it's just fantastic. And it's good to see and hear like the different thoughts and the different ideas that you guys all bring to the table. It's a lot of fun. and it's great having you guys. You're all great guests too. So Wizard podcast on YouTube, and then also it's So Wizard podcast on Twitter, I think, as well, or just So Wizard.
I think it's So Wizard podcast on everything.
Sounds right.
Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Joey's been doing a lot of comic reviews and stuff on TikTok. He's really got that going.
Excellent. So definitely check that out. And come back next week when Joey's going to be on. He's going to watch Hook for the first time. He's never seen it.
Oh, good pick. Good pick.
Yeah. I can't wait because that movie's it's divisive, which is weird to think about.
Really?
Yeah, there are people out there that really don't like that movie, and I'm curious to see what Joey thinks about it when he finally gets a chance to watch it.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to watch that one because that movie was. I mean, I probably watched that weekly as a kid for years.
Oh yeah, I definitely watched. Growing up as a fan of Robin Williams as much as I was,
exactly,
I couldn't help but watch that all the time. I actually was in a film festival. My friends and I submitted a film when we were like 20, and the only other, I think, there were 2 other feature film length submissions, and one of them was with Dante Basco, Rufio from Hook.
Okay,
was in it. So that was kind of fun to be in the same film festival as him.
Yeah, a little bit of a full circle moment there.
Yeah. So, well, excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here. This is a ton of fun. I do this show live on Sunday nights, twitch.tv/TV's Travis, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Show comes out on Wednesdays. You can also check out my YouTube channel at TV's Travis. I put archives of this show. I'm starting to work on some new YouTube only content as well. So definitely check out that. I'm all over every social media platform as TV's Travis, and there is even a Patreon for this show. For as little as $1 per episode, you can support the show that way, or just support the show by telling people about it and getting them to listen. That's great too. So I will be back next week with Joey from So Wizard Podcast, and I'm gonna make him watch Hook. But Adam, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
And get out, enjoy your movies, and let's be excellent to each other. This has been Wait You Haven't Seen.
Please don't tell me we lost an engine.
All right, I won't tell you that.
Okay.
That one cracked me up. That was